Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Wednesday, May 8th. I'm your host, Tom Moore. The Akron game in 115 days, the game against Michigan in 206 days. We have another update from the Southern Swing, just in case you're wondering what the Southern Swing is. If you haven't listened to a couple of the shows earlier this week or late last week, Marc Givler and Kevin Noon traveling all around the South to meet with some of the very best high school football players in the country, talk to them, their coaches, their families, whoever else, get insight on them as players, them as prospects, and where things might stand between them and Ohio State. So why do they go all over the South? Well, that is where some of the very, very best players in the country live. And they have already met with one of the guys considered the number one player in the class of 2025, one of the guys considered the number one overall player in the class of 2026, both potentially future Buckeyes. We're going to be talking about both of those guys, as well as maybe another guy or two on the show. We're going to be doing that with Marc Givler. Marc, first of all, how are you enjoying all of the time in the car with Kevin Noon and all of the fast food stops and all of the good stuff that comes with being on the road for weeks at a time?
Oh, Tom, we're living the dream right now. Actually, we had a subscriber take us out to a minor league baseball game in Charlotte, so that was actually very nice. So shout out to him. Shout out to Dave for putting us up in a suite at the AAA game and letting us kind of relax for an evening before we hit back on the road. But it's I'm used to it by now. We do this. I've done this every spring for probably 11 years now, and we've got it down to kind of a science. So the difficult stuff is kind of ahead of us now. We've kind of made the easy, kind of wound our way down to Georgia, and now it's gonna get all sorts of fun.
Well, there are a lot of very talented players in Georgia. There are a lot of very talented players in Florida where you're going to be going as well. But first, we got to talk about a couple of guys from North Carolina. One of them, David Sanders, offensive tackle, ranked the number one player overall in the class of 2025 by some sources. He made a surprise visit to Ohio State last week, and then you made a somewhat surprise visit to his high school this week. Got a chance to talk to him, some of the folks around him. I know you've put more information on our board than we generally are going to be sharing here, so if people want a little more detail on a lot of this stuff, we're going to become a member of BuckeyeHuddle.com, but let people know just sort of broadly where things are standing with David Sanders and the Buckeyes right now.
I mean, 6 months ago, and maybe probably argue about 2 or 3 months ago, this was kind of a no-chance situation for Ohio State. They were kind of way down his top list of schools. I really didn't give him much of a chance at all. I think that has changed a lot here in the last few weeks. This was his second visit to Ohio State in about a month, maybe a month and a half. And that first visit this spring kind of brought him back for this last one. He said the communication's been fantastic there with Ohio State. So we will see. I'm getting the sense now that I've always felt Clemson was going to be very strong in this, and I still think they are. And I think but I think Ohio State has moved from that kind of tier 2 back of the pack among his top 6 schools to I think that tier 1 top 2 or 3 schools list. And I think Tennessee and Ohio State have probably got the most momentum right now. I'm a little bit surprised that Georgia doesn't have much momentum right now, and that could change in the blink of an eye. He's going to make an official visit there in June. But it's a heated battle right now, and he's a special talent. So no one's going to give up on this one.
Well, the Buckeyes do not yet have the number one player overall in the class of 2025. They do, however, have their quarterback in 2025. That is Tavian St. Clair, of course, a 5-star prospect. He is already locked in the class and is about as solidly committed as you possibly can be without having officially signed that letter of intent. That'll happen in December. However, they do not yet have their quarterback for the class of 2026. And we've talked about a bunch of different names there, all over the place, all over the nation, guys in Ohio, guys all over the South. And now you've got a chance to talk this week with the number one player, according to some sources, in the class of 2026. This is Faison Brandon. He is a quarterback out of Greensboro, North Carolina. That is not a name we've talked about a lot, or maybe at all, on this show before. Let people know a little bit about him.
Yeah, they actually just offered him last week. Chip Kelly was by the school and watched him work out and was impressed and offered him and was able to talked to him on the phone later that day, and he is unique. He is 6'4", 200 pounds. He's still only 15 years old, so he really should be a 2027 kid. A lot of the guys he's competing with are at least a year older. And for example, a guy we talked a lot about before he committed to Georgia, Jared Curtis, is 17. So, there's an age gap there. Yet he is extremely productive. 36 touchdowns, 3 interceptions as a sophomore, as a 15-year-old sophomore, and added almost 600 yards and 9 touchdowns on the ground. He's a dual threat. He is Jaden Daniels comes to mind, kind of watching his film, but even like physically, like that's a kid that could look a whole lot like Vince Young in 2 years. He is a specimen and a great kid, very mature and humble, so that was good to see. He did visit Ohio State early, like as a freshman for like a practice. Obviously, a lot's changed since then. He's going to try and get back up this summer. He and his family have been talking with the Ohio State coaches about that, either June or July. And we'll see where it goes, but there's some genuine interest there. And this would be a guy, Ohio State's still kind of figuring out their 2026 quarterback board. This is a guy I think will be pretty high up there.
Yeah, well, when the two comps you're throwing out, you are not generally one to get real hyperbolic with comps. So if the two comps you're throwing out both won the Heisman Trophy, like that feels pretty like there's probably a little bit of a ceiling there. And I do want to make a point about the age here, because this is something that you hear about, like Major League Baseball teams don't necessarily want to draft overage guys who are graduating high school at 19, something like that. If you're a year younger, if you're a 21-year-old playing AAA, that's, what you're doing there is much more impressive than the 24-year-old doing the same thing. So a 15-year-old who is kind of getting stacked up against 17-year-olds in high school, there's a lot more room for growth physically, mentally, maturity-wise, all of that stuff. You're way ahead of the curve if you're matching up with people who are a couple of years older. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure people understood the context behind that. So that is Faison Brandon, 2026 quarterback. Last guy I wanted to talk to you about, someone who I guess Faison Brandon could throw the ball to at some point in the future, and David Sanders could be blocking to allow Faison Brandon time to throw the ball to Brody Keefe, top 100 wide receiver. Mark, I just sort of assume if Ohio State's in on a wide receiver, it's like 50-50 that they're going to get him. So where do things stand with Brody Keefe and Brian Hartline and his magical recruiting touch?
50-50 might be interesting, because I think right now Ohio State and Tennessee are his top two. I think he's going to end up at one of those two programs. There's some other schools involved, of course. There's going to be Georgia's offered. There's a few other schools that he's going to be looking at. But he told me he's going to start to get serious about that probably in the fall in terms of narrowing his list. But he's already been up to Ohio State 3 times in the past year. He's going to be back this summer. He's going to be back in the fall. Just loves Brian Hartline, and again, they're selling him on being part of the legacy they've built here at Ohio State of wide receivers. So and he's listening. So those are the two schools I think are probably in the best shape right now. An interesting kind of dynamic here, and this probably even goes more to Faison Brandon than it does Brody Keefe, is Chris Henry, Chris Henry Jr., Ohio State's 5-star wide receiver commit in 2026, grew up in Charlotte. So he, at some point, Ohio State's going to get those guys together and let them kind of bond, because that would be I think a great tool, especially with Faison Brandon, of like, hey, 5-star receiver for you to throw to. Oh, by the way, he's also from North Carolina originally before he moved to Ohio and California. And then Brody Keefe's aware of Chris, obviously, and I think they've exchanged some. I think they've overlapped on a visit or two. So there is, a surface level knowledge there of each other. And again, 2 Charlotte guys there. So that could be maybe a secret weapon for the Buckeyes here as they try and get into North Carolina in 2026. And guys, we have updates on the site that we may not be talking about in this episode. Guys like Thomas Davis Jr. Thomas Davis Jr. was trying to claim Chris Henry for North Carolina when we talked to Thomas the other day. So Chris actually knows a lot of those guys in 2026 in North Carolina that they've offered. So that could be something to watch. It's not going to it's not necessarily the Pied Piper for those guys. They're just going to come, run into them. But it could add an extra layer of comfortability for the Buckeyes as they try and land some of these guys.
Well, and as Mark mentioned, they have talked to plenty of other guys. In addition to the ones we're talking about here, you can find some of those interviews on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. But you can find all of the information, lots of stories about these guys, lots of insider nuggets and all that on our Huddle board presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse. Lots of interesting insight and analysis there on all of this. And of course, we are right now in the middle of our annual subscription sale. You want to get access to all that great insider information? Well, this is a great time to do it. You can save about 40% on your annual subscription by signing up right now. And that goes for whether you're currently an annual member, you can extend your membership. If you're a monthly member, you can convert to an annual. If you're not a member at all, well, you can finally get a peek behind the curtain at all the good stuff at BuckeyeHuddle.com by signing up today. Mark, I know you have been through West Virginia and the Carolinas. Right now, you are south of Atlanta, as according to your travelogue on the board. Where are your next few days going to be?
Yeah, so we made it all the way to Columbus, Georgia from Charlotte last night. So we are going to be obviously in Georgia here for a few days, and we have a new state. I'll dive into that here. We have driven through Alabama before. We have never stopped at a high school during Southern Swing in Alabama. I've covered a high school game in the fall in Alabama. I have never stopped at a high school for Southern Swing in Alabama. That will change today. We have a couple stops lined up in Alabama today. And then again, it'll be off to we'll be back across the border into Georgia for a bunch of Georgia content the next few days.
Well, a lot of that stuff coming up all this week at BuckeyeHuddle.com. So again, make sure you sign up today. We always tell you this is a great way to support us and the work we do on YouTube and on our podcast and all that kind of stuff. It's also a great way to get even more great content involving the Buckeyes, recruiting, and all that good stuff, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.